Welcome to Work Cookie, a CBOC podcast, is the Society for Evidence-Based Organizational Consulting. Really excited today to bring you an IO related topic of ethics, organizational and leadership ethics, which we really have been covering for this entire month. And today our topic is ethics or optics, when corporate purpose becomes a performance. So a really interesting topic to cover, considering a lot of recent events. And so that's actually what the description of today was about. So I'm going to go ahead and pop some resources in the chat first. We'll start from that place. And the description for this particular podcast is really not intended to be the entire conversation. It is really meant to be the foundation. And hopefully, as I share some of that today, that will be evident in some of these initial conversations here. So before I start with this conversation, though, I really do want to make sure to state that I really approach this conversation and I start this from a real posture of humility and a posture of desire for human dignity in the conversation. Because the letter that was described in the particular description of this invite was the letter from Minnesota CEOs. There was actually a lot of discourse that happened back and forth, and it's a really delicate topic. And so as I approach this topic, just want to make sure I explicitly state that so that our conversation can just be abounding with respect. So I want to just touch on two general definitions here before we dive into some specifics. Organizational ethics, I want to make sure there's a definition to really set us foundationally here. That is how a company or organization is deciding between right and wrong in its operations, its decision making, and the way that it treats people, and people equal employees, customers, and the community and society at large. So all of those are touched by organizations, which might be treating your employees fairly, being honest with your customers, protecting data, right? Those are all relevant things when it comes to ethics as well. And related to this particular foundational topic, acting responsibly towards society and our environment. So in short, really the moral compass, right, of the organization and the values that create that moral compass. On the leadership ethics side, which we already had an episode on specifically targeting leadership, but it's very relevant when you talk CEO. This is your most senior leader in the organization. That's really the personal part of it for them and how they choose to model ethical behavior when making decisions, using their power and influence in the community and within the organization as well. So making fair decisions, using their authority responsibly, and then also putting others or people, whether it's customers, people in the organization, or the society at large, above personal gain. And I think we also have seen examples of the unethical side of that, right? Where the personal gain is at the front, or there's a posture there from a senior leader that perhaps we would classify as unethical. And so this particular letter from CEOs, which really called for de-escalation of what was happening community-wide or is happening community-wide in the U.S. state of Minnesota, was widely criticized from press outlets, from a lot of people on social media, for several categories of what they classified as unethical, which was being soft, what they called both-siderism, lack of specifics within the letter, so very general language, an avoidance of accountability, and also weak language within it. I'm not really saying that this is right or wrong, but these are the criticisms that you'll find out there, because really on the other side, there was defense of the letter as necessary, as cautious, and as being purposefully general in a very highly volatile political environment. And so I start there, and some of the resources that I placed in the chat talk about some theories that really have been around for quite a while. There's the ethical climate theory from 1988, which defines ethical climate as shared perceptions about what is ethically correct behavior in an organization. Likewise, there are some more recent research references in there that talk about how employees identify with the company and how it creates behaviors or may impact behaviors from employees, as well as disengagement, which has been a hot topic here on Work Cookie before, disengagement, right, within employees. So just that line from ethical climate to disengagement, where the ethical climate is low ethics. Bandura also has some work out there for moral disengagement, which really is a foundational theory about how individuals rationalize immoral behavior and to maintain positive self-image. Not saying that is the case here, right, in this specific example, but it is something certainly well documented in research when people are trying to present themselves, or the optics, right, of what we talked about in our title here. That's a really relevant theory or construct to consider and share in that conversation. The other one really is employee trust. So there's a lot of research about disengagement and unethical behaviors, but also concepts like corporate social responsibility. What is the organization doing to be socially responsible and ethical in the way that it impacts society? Is it positively or negatively impacting society? And then this term greenwashing, which I've actually heard a lot in the last week, interestingly enough, but which is misleading or being deceptive in the public when it comes to environmentally responsible behaviors just to preserve a public image. So it is a variety of ethical behaviors or ethical topics that really impact the employees and the community. And I think this particular letter that we're starting as kind of the foundation of a broader topic really presented several different facets of that. The employees for those organizations, how did they feel about what was presented out in the world, but also generally speaking, how are organizations now in your employer-friendly market being corporately responsible? Are they being corporately responsible? Is there this optics happening in certain organizations, and what is the impact there for leaders, for the community, for employees? And how do we do a better job with really leading forward with ethics? I don't know that there's the question that ethics should exist, right? Or that high ethics, let me clarify, high ethics should exist within organizations and leaders. But where are we today? And how do we move the needle and dial towards a higher ethical stance and standpoint in our organizations? So Natasha, I see your hand up. Let's start with you.
Yes, so I want to tackle the latter part of what you just discussed in terms of the ethics. And every time you say ethics, all I can think about is the brand management and the storytelling. The best way the first point of entry of how an organization communicates what it stands for, or the best way for employees to dictate what an employer stands for. Well, two ways. The first would be the organization website and their mission, what they stand for, their values. Then the next place will be the employee handbook in terms of the values of what is tolerated, what is not tolerated. And then beyond those two places, employees look at not just what you say, but also how you act. A lot of organizations will flat out state in their handbook, we value integrity. If you lie or you disclose of false information at any given point, that might be punishable up to termination. However, we have a lot of those same organizations in this employer-friendly environment who are creating lies, dare I say, flat out, as motives to terminate employees. And it does not just begin or end with the specific employee. Let's say, for instance, they concoct a performance improvement plan out of nowhere, and they use that as grounds for termination. Well, the employee now, who is a high performer, has never had any performance issues up until they listened to you when you said, we have an open door policy. Come to us and tell us how you really think. and I tell you how I really think or how I experience the organization, next thing I know, I'm on a PIP and later terminated. Well, that termination and the cause does not just end with that employee. Employees talk. And so when others pick up on those cues, they realize that, hey, you have an ethical issue. If I can be terminated based off of a lie, then what accountability do you hold? When we think about organizations, for the most part, we always know that a business is just a business. Their end goal is how do we make money? No matter what they say. But now we're also seeing a lot of organizations putting sponsorship behind political individuals, political parties that don't necessarily align with either their mission statement, their views, or their populace. And so how and where organizations choose to invest their monies are ways that speak to that employees translate that, we now see your values, and your values might not align with what is right or what I believe in, or goes against everything that we stand for and everything that you claim to stand for. And so those are the social, professional, ethical cues that employees now receive from their employers, and that employers need to be more mindful of how they communicate them, because that then in turn dictates the amount of effort, how employees show up, and lastly, whether or not they will want to continue to invest their all in your organization or your ability to retain them.
Thank you. Some really great points there, Natasha. And I'll add as well, there may be a high level of integrity from the employee, and they may still show up exactly in the workday how they're expected to, or how you've outlined expectations. But then when they go home, the energy is drained, right? If there's this dissonance between company values, leadership behavior, what's being presented out in the society, they may still even show up in the day to day, but who they bring home may be impacted. So it really extends even beyond the hours of 9 to 5, what they bring into their home life and their families. And I think that's where the leader posture is critical, to ensure that there is an alignment there versus a misalignment. So thank you for those points. Lee, let's go over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, great points by Natasha as usual. The interesting thing about this topic, well, and just our global workplace in general right now, is the cultural aspect of this. Ethics, hugely important, as it should be. But the interesting thing about this, from just from a purely academics type thing, is that something considered ethical or not ethical is not absolute, and it is actually in many cases is very culturally specific. And something that is considered ethical in one culture may be considered very unethical in another culture, and which makes it very challenging a lot of times in this global economy when you are in a multinational organization, or maybe you're just doing business with organizations in other cultures. And you may be, excuse me, you may be doing business with organizations that engage in practices that you consider very unethical, that to them and their culture is very normal and accepted. And so then you're in that position. What do you do? Because, now we're in conflict. Now we're in cognitive dissonance. Now we're dealing with, am I living in alignment with my values? Now, is my organization's stated values, are we in conflict? Because there are parts of the world that are diametrically opposed to each other in their norms and their values, and even what they consider ethical. And, and I'm not gonna and I'm not gonna get into the debate of who's right or wrong at this point. I mean, that's not the point of my thing here. But, because I'm sure there are people with very strong opinions on that. But you know, but from a personal standpoint and an organizational standpoint, you can't get around the fact that we are in a multicultural global economy with a multicultural global workforce. And these conflicts are happening and they will continue to happen. And that does bring you to some very, very significant decision points. And, to pull the string on this, there are some very, very significant things that is, when we talk about, diversity and inclusion and these things, you know, there are some very, very delicate conversations and very delicate things that you have to deal with here of, engaging in these. There are some lines that aren't as clear as we would like them to be. I personally, there are some lines I think should be very clear. To Natasha's point, is it true or is it not true? That should be pretty clear. Is it true or false? That should be pretty clear. There are some things that, from my point of view, should be pretty, clear. But I understand that sometimes when I'm dealing with people that are from a different background, that may not be as clear in some instances. And sometimes that puts us in a quandary, and it does. And how do you deal with those? Do you just have to recuse yourself and go, I cannot be in this situation because I am, it's going to force me to act in a way that I consider unethical. Well, now we're in a situation too, because now I'm in a position of having to tell someone else that I consider what you're doing unethical. Now we're in conflict. So this is multifaceted, and I don't think we're going to get to a clean decision on this anytime soon. But it is something that is, it's something that I'm glad we're having this conversation because it is very, very important. It is something that there's not a clean answer to, and I wish there was, and I hope one day there is. But it is something that we have to consider. And some great points have been made about the organization that you are in, that you choose to work for. There are a lot of organizations that are making public stances that formerly organizations did not make. Are those stances in aligned with their stated values? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Are those public stances and stated values in alignment with your personal values? Can you resolve that? Or do you need to find someplace else to be? Do you fit that culture? These are, it's important things because there is a cognitive dissonance, and I think Dr. Amy said it a minute ago. Is it worth it to go and to fight that internal turmoil to get home every day and just be wiped out and worn out and and there's bleed over. You're going to take that home to your, to the other people in your life. And there are important considerations there. There's always bleed over. So I could go on about this, but I'm going to be considerate because there's other hands up and brilliant people in the room. So I cede the floor.
Thank you so much, Lee. I love the call out there of the global nature of our present landscape at work. Geographical boundaries are really being eroded and have been for a while, even beginning with things like placing positions offshore, right? So this has been a trend we're seeing, but also now through remote work and teaming and even resources that are available for organizations to obtain talent from other countries, we really do have to consider the perspectives of those particular organizations, those countries, those cultural backgrounds. And so I bring forth briefly before we get to you, Nick, a few different ethical perspectives that are explicitly stated. So the utilitarian perspective states that we focus on the maximizing of a benefit and minimizing harm in organizations in circumstances, right? The deontological perspective also talks about ethics in leadership emphasizing duty and obligations. And that is a lot more prevalent in some countries than others, the duty or obligation focused method of ethics. And then also virtue ethics, which promotes character, integrity, and compassion in decision making. But where I do see an alignment of all of these ethical perspectives is a net positive benefit, right? So there may be some intersection where it's, the human-centric leadership arena is where I really live and breathe, and there may be some intersection of all of these documented perspectives that really focus on benefiting the human. And so I haven't seen a framework like that yet. Anyone who's here or listening in the future, maybe that's your calling. So Nick, let's go over to you.
Yeah. So not a light topic by any stretch of the imagination. And, we live in a world where things are recorded and things are written down, and anything you say can and will be used against you in the public opinion court. So it's an unenviable position for leaders to be in, because we talk about ethics or optics. I want to say it's both. If you're not living out your ethics, if you're not taking action and letting people see what you believe, you're just kind of hiding quietly in the corner. I pulled up the letter from over 60 CEOs, and it's everything. Like, I grew up in Minnesota, and my extended family is very much in the cities. And so all of these big hitters, Best Buy, Target, 3M, like they're big deals. They're national, and they've made that city their home. And they've grown up there, as it were. And so it's, the criticism of the letter that it's soft pedaling, because it's kind of a no-brainer. Hey, can we settle down so we can get our city back and conduct business, is kind of the underlying tone that I pick up from it. Regardless of why it all started, can we just take a pause and a deep breath? And it's kind of the lowest common objective that you're getting to. It's the one thing where we can all meet on. And there's so much diversity of thought and diversity of purpose, to see the signatories be from various aspects of industry, says, okay, this is a point where we can get all together here. Like, let's settle down. And there is that optics of, well, okay, do the Twins or Vikings really need to put out a public statement about what's going on in the community? No, but they have optics they have to, perceive. They've got a fan base to appeal. And it's even harder, because are we going to make everybody happy with a statement like that? No, there is a point where when you make a stand in such a way, you are going to ruffle some feathers. Every action has an opposite reaction to some degree. And so by making a statement, being concrete, putting it on the record, there is a declaration to some degree on that as well. And it just shows that a corporation or organization doesn't live in a vacuum. There is news here in Denver that a major government contractor is taking their ball and going to another state because they didn't like the public pressure that they were getting. Do I agree with the impact of jobs and people? Yes, no, maybe, but that is their sort of, I'm going to vote with where we, put our headquarters and things like that. So I think that that's a lot of a two-way street, and it's tough, because I always say that, an organizational culture is the personality of the founder at scale, good, bad, or otherwise. And so when we're talking about CEOs and you're putting a face to an organization, when do they have to make a statement? When do they, stay in their lane and say, hey, man, we're retail. Our stores are still going okay. This, obviously is not a great situation in our backyard, but we're going to stay neutral because we want to keep making money and we don't want to ruffle the wrong amount of feathers in the right or wrong way. But even that, is an ethical decision. What is our primary purpose as an organization? How are we going to interact with our community? And we would love, people and organizations to be completely aligned, where what you say is what you do, and we know to expect that. Unfortunately, people as individuals are not always consistent, and you put large groups of people together, and that creates even more inconsistency. And then, what are the second, third, order effects of some of those decisions? To make a stand, you put yourself out there, and you've got to commit. It's almost as simple as that. Like, if you're going to make a controversial statement or enter into an area where there is consequence, collateral damage, all that sort of stuff. The organizations need to be sure because there's big risk. But I think that the scale for an individual taking an ethical stand and an organization taking an ethical stand, it's the same. It's the same picture, just zoomed in or zoomed out.
Thanks, Nick. I want to unpack a couple of things you said there before we get back to Natasha. You talked about a particular organization and how they vote with their headquarters and where that's housed at. Likewise, we'll see that from customers or consumers voting with their money and taking their business to another organization. And leaders are well aware that that is a potential impact of making a public stand. That because we made this particular choice as an organization or put out this statement, even, we know that there will be a cascading impact to our customer base. And so I think that's something that's really obviously factored in when organizations choose when and where and what they say out in the public sphere, right? But that's something also I think that is a great plug-in place for IOs to help coach, to help even scenario plan, so that an organization will understand what the impact of standing in their values is going to be from a real practical sense and be prepared for whatever the fallout might be, good or bad, right? We're not saying it's only negative that making public statements brings to an organization, right? But it may be something that is a net positive for them, right? So IOs can really plug in, I think, there and plug and play.
Yeah, I think we can't always see around corners and things like that, but you can't get a Chick-fil-A sandwich on Sunday, and they're not changing that policy. They have stood in their values, and they have not made a secret about it. It has caused controversy. People have said, oh, they support these causes. That doesn't align. I don't care how good the chicken is. I'm going elsewhere. And so I think that, I think there's a performance expectation on the organizational side to be all things to all people. And there's a point where if you say, we're going to be this thing for this demographic, and we know it's going to upset everybody else, but this is the focus we have, and this is how we want to conduct our business. Again, I'm not going to put my ethics on anybody else, in the theory of respect, but it is that two-way street. Okay, you're going to do that. I don't care for it. I'm going to take my business elsewhere. I'm going to take my employment elsewhere. I'm going to actively work against the causes you're doing. These are the choices and the interplays. Again, those reactions that happen, that I think individuals can and should consider, organizations should consider. But it's exhausting, and it's a lot of reflection and vulnerability when you really say, this is what I believe. This is how I believe things should be conducted in society at large.
Absolutely. The Chick-fil-A example is great. There's also a company called B&H Photo that closes their e-commerce and all of their operations on Saturday to observe Shabbat because they are Orthodox Jew owners and founders. And it is a really a firm statement, right? When you say my organization and my business and my commerce will match my belief system. So just an interesting use case there as well. Natasha, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I actually will second that, Dr. Emmy. Like, I do agree with Chick-fil-A. The Chick-fil-A example that Nick mentioned, Chick-fil-A, for as long as we've known it, their values are, hey, we believe that Sunday should be a day of rest. They have always been transparent and open about what they stand for, whether or not you agree with how they feel. Their core values, their mission statement has never changed as a result of what the public opinion thinks, because that is who they are and what they stand for. And I appreciate that example so much because it makes me think about the advice that I give to organizations, which is very similar to advice that we provide employees or individuals that we coach. Think the long-term game. I think that in the last, I would say, 5 years, to be honest, we have a lot of organizations that have aligned their promises and their statements with what is happening around the world. Wherein at the height of COVID, a lot of issues presented themselves and organizations made a lot of, promises, social promises, and business promises to increase diversity at all levels of their organization by way of diversifying their staff, diversifying business portfolios, investment ventures, donations, the list goes on. And in recent years, or dare I say in the last year, a lot of organizations have walked back those promises that were financially beneficial to them. And one example that stands out the most for me is the example of Target, who made all of these promises and was benefiting from the promises up until recent months, where they walked back certain promises and they ended a lot of contracts with different investments and deals that they partnered with. And as a result, they lost a lot of money, billions of dollars of money. And most recently, they actually fell off of the Fortune's most admired companies, Fortune's most admired companies list for the first time since 2021. And so we're now seeing much larger impacts. And as a result of the money that they have lost, they have also had to lay off a lot of employees, and the layoffs continue. And it goes to show that when you make decisions or where you invest your money, when you make those decisions, sometimes they have long-term consequences. And be it from a political standpoint or a social standpoint, you really have to continue to think the long term and not what is going to benefit you in the short term of a particular administration or what the public deems an important issue or matter in this for the next 2 years. You have to be consistent in the pillars that build your organization, the pillars that your organization is founded upon. And so when you have those doubts about where you should lean, how you should lean, the ethical decisions that you have to make, I always caution leaders to go back to their mission statement. Is the decision that you're going to make, is it supported by the mission statement? Like anyone can say, oh, I hear this business decision. Let me go to your website and see whether or not it falls within that. Does it align with your handbook policy? Does it align with your 5-year business strategy plan or your North Star? Because as Nick mentioned, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so you really have to think about the consequences in terms of what has history told us about what has been successful leading up until today. And if we make this decision, what are the consequences that will come out of it? And are we able to withstand it? Just like Chick-fil-A has been able to weather whatever it is that they went through. The public was had an uproar about, hey, LGBTQ, I don't care how great their sandwiches are. If they don't believe in same-sex marriage, I'm not going to eat there. But that has not impacted their bottom line because they've never been wishy-washy about what they believe in. And so with organizations, you can lose credibility. You can lose a target. You can lose a target audience that you will never regain as a result of a short-term, short game decision that should not have been thought of about what's happening in the moment, but ultimately your long-term goal, your legacy, your mission, who you are, and whether or not that is conveyed in every aspect of your business, and that your employees alike will be proud to support and advocate and know that I can continue to show up here because who they say they are, they truly are.
I love that notation there, really, though, about the practices within the organization. And I want to present a question back to you, Natasha, and to anyone else here. When an organization does need to change a practice, how do they do this in a way that retains organizational integrity? And I'll present an example. An organization I used to work for had half day Fridays. At a certain point, they did have to financially survive. They had to lay off a large number of their workers. Post-COVID, it was really an influx of employees. And then when people started going back into the office, this organization was losing a lot of money. So they decided to roll back the half day Friday because they didn't have the workers to be able to complete the work that they had in their backlog of needs. And so the way that an organization makes changes like that, where perhaps they're actually taking away a benefit, adding extra hours, really post layoff, especially, we talked about that in the leadership episode as well, on how leaders can actually approach those things with dignity for the human employees that are there, right? And not just for the leaders there. But how do we do this with dignity? Many organizations are notorious, or we'll see headlines for the ways they do it wrong. But how do we make changes within an organization in a way that does respect humanity?
Yeah, I think the first way of doing so is first centering the human. When you ask, how do we do so in a way that dignifies the humanity? By focusing on the human. A lot of organizations, and I believe when we were talking about the benefits of COVID in a previous world, dare I say, everybody talked about how organizations bottom lines had been adjusted. They were, saving a lot more money because we're not paying anymore for a brick and mortar. And a lot of organizations ended up canceling their rents, their mortgages, their rentals for whatever building space that they occupied, because the future of work was remote. But then all of a sudden, there is a pressure that everybody has to return to work because the very same things that data suggested increased engagement and bottom line creativity, performance for a lot, all of a sudden is no longer working. And we have to be back in the office, and organizations again are going back to paying mortgages. And then all of a sudden we have to lay off. But do we really have to lay off? What happened overnight? Are there other expenditures that we can cut before we impact the people, before we impact the benefits that we provide people, right? And I think it goes back. So that's one side of it. A lot of organizations make decisions not because they are necessary, but because they choose to. And that is when someone has to be in the room and really say, and why do we need to do this? Question the bottom line, question the reason. And the second part about it would be, again, brand management, managing the stories. Your employees are not children. They have business acumen as well. They have EQ. They can understand decisions. Get ahead of the storytelling. Don't allow for them to fill in the blanks or come up with their own conclusion. Explain why the layoffs are necessary. Explain everything that you have done in order to not have layoffs of people. too often we think it is in the laying off of people first and then everything else, where we have a lot of organizations that have laid off individuals but had to go back and rehire or repost the jobs at a lower salary rate because they realize we actually do need the people. So be it restructuring on the inside, what can we do before we first lay off and impact people? Because once you start laying off and you impact and you impact people's lives at that level, it's not just the people you lay off, it's also the people that survived. When am I going to be next? I now see that this organization does not care about its people and is not loyal to this people. And once the first opportunity presents itself for me, I am going to jump ship. So really explain those decisions. And lastly, I would say apologize. Accept, admit, and acknowledge that we made a mistake. It is okay to shift from an idea, a business goal or objective that was previously communicated, and realizing, hey, we did not make the right decision here, and this is what we're now doing to repair that decision and to move in the right direction. Too often, organizations believe that we just say what we're going to do next. We can brush over an issue. We can dust the issue under the rug. What are they going to do? Confront us? Make a post about us on social media? Leave us? We're still going to be in business and they're still going to need us. Yeah, but the quality of how they show up is still impacted. The trust that they have of you, the stories that they tell about you, referrals, and so much more is impacted. And I think that organizations, those are the ways that we show that we are ethical, is by acting ethical, even if it does not necessarily align with what you believe in. But how do our decisions impact the people, our populace? Because ultimately, we are not a business without them carrying out our objectives. And so think twice. And if you're ever confused, go back to your mission statement, the 5-year plan that was communicated. And sometimes the mistake might even be in that 5-year plan. Does that mean that we remain rigid to that 5-year plan? Or do we now become agile and be able to say we made a mistake and we should have done this, and communicate what the this is? And also engage with your employees, town hall meetings, surveys, listen to them. Don't be defensive. Apply what is necessary. Apply what will help you to be able to continue to work, to collaborate with your employees in order to ensure that integrity is something that is interwoven in every aspect of your organization.
Thank you. I love those points. I mean, especially the accountability, right? Apologizing is taking accountability. So thank you so much, Natasha. Nick, let's go over to you.
Something that jumped in my head, we talk about, is it optics? And I think when it is purely about the optics, that's when you see, this flip-flop, prisoner of the moment. I'm going to jump on the current cause because it's the popular thing to do. And, probably a strong component of genuine ethics is not accountability, being genuine, being authentic. So if it's not true to your mission and you're just doing it because all the other cool kids are doing it, for lack of a better term, you're reacting, you're posturing. So I think the authenticity in communication really does allow organizations to say, this is my target demographic, this is where we're going, this is what we want to do. And I think that there is, again, because there's so much, coverage and, outrage is the flavor of the week. Most of the time, we see people doing it wrong and you're like, get them. That's not okay. Stand up for the little guy. And it's easy to just stay in that moment. But we can think of, companies that started as, war profiteering and have pivoted to other useful products. The decision of today is important. And also there's a long term. Are they going to be the people who say, oh, in light of new information, we're going to move away from this product. Oh, we didn't know that lead paint was going to be a bad idea. Let's, fix that problem. Let's mitigate. And I think that's what Natasha's saying. Yes, you can say you're sorry, but you also need to mitigate damage that you may have caused. And I think that is a social responsibility that some organizations get right and some get wrong. And I think if people do tend to focus on where their values lead them, that opens up more space in other areas. Because if, I'm running a business and my focus is on, 40-year-old fathers, and that's the content I'm generating, that's the place that I'm going, that's great. I'm not excluding, everybody else who might be in parenthood or singleness, but I can only focus so much on one problem. And I'm going to work over here, and I'm going to hope that you do your best over there. And when we need to bounce ideas off of what might work in other arenas, that communication can be open. But I think that the expectation that an organization or even a person can be all things to all people is going to be like bouncing your head against a brick wall. It's doing something, but is it really effective?
I love that example there. Thank you. And I think the other question that comes to mind, and I don't have an answer for it, what role do organizations have in providing a positive impact to different aspects of society, different groups, especially if their organization is not really targeting benefiting other populations or society at large. So just interesting questions. I have more questions and answers, but Rich has got all the answers. So let's go over to you.
I don't know if I have any answers to anything. I don't know. I mean, today, I think that we're at a point in time where we have to be more authentic, and I think that companies are being less just purely performative and more authentic in their in how they are handling ethics, because it makes no sense, honestly, to today's market to not start with values. I mean, I think all the literature out there, programs such as Scale Up and EOS and things like that for small businesses really enforce, or I shouldn't say enforce, but reinforce the idea that you should lead with values. The values inform the mission, the vision of the company, and I think it's those that that truly stand out in the market and make themselves competitive, right? So, from a competitive point of view, it makes total sense to be, and I think we're seeing this. It makes total sense to be much more authentic than performative as it has been in the past. I mean, we've got things like Glassdoor reviews, Google reviews, right? We have Amazon reviews. So if you don't come across authentically, there's a problem. If you don't come across ethically, you have a problem. Those that have like 5-star reviews, and there's quite a few. I mean, almost every company that I've ever come across has some 1 or 2-star review because somebody didn't feel good about something or other, right? But I think we're in a place where the competitive advantage really relies on us being able to have and lead with ethical responsibility. So I've actually seen this in play. I worked for an association several years ago. The best, bar none, and forgive me for some of the other bosses that I've had in my life, but bar none, the best boss and the best leader I've ever come across was the leader of this organization, Brian, who really did lead with heart. So it was a 501c6 association, but it also had a 501c3 charity, and it was run very similar to the charity, which was a they would do like free community events, and they did they would put learning centers into everyday places. It was a really great charity, but the values that were shared within that that particular organization bled into the more business aspect, right? The association aspect of that company. And then the remarkable part about all of that was through his leadership, his example, the rest of the team aligned very well to those values. And not only that, but the board of directors, who were largely independent owners of their companies, aligned so strongly with those values that they ran their organizations that way, and it made them competitive in their spaces. So I think there's a lot of this, especially on the small business side. I mean, that's primarily where I come from, right? Is small business. Is that I think we've seen. Of course, there are plenty of examples of unethical small businesses out there. Don't get me wrong, but or at least unethical practices that have happened. But from I have seen a dramatic change over the course of time, somewhat because of the outward facing, feature like online reviews and those types of things. I have seen a remarkable change and shift in the conversation towards leading with values. That's not just optics, but actually true ethical foundations within what they do.
I love that. Thank you. And I love the focus there on the underlying values, right? That is a determining foundation of where do you compromise, or what's compromisable and what's not, right? Compromisable. And I love that organizational example you have there about the culture that really allows that, because what tends to happen in those organizations as well is long tenured people employed there, right, as well. So if they're able to identify with the organizational values, if they're able to see themselves providing an impact, maybe it is to other employees, maybe it's to the customers of the community in that example through maybe the nonprofit or not-for-profit wing or arm, and they're seeing how they're actually impacting real people's lives, that then creates your long tenured employees. That creates your link to the heart, right? Cruz's imposer talks about encouraging the heart.
Encourage the heart, right?
Yes, encourage
what are
the heart.
Right, those the five practices of exemplary leadership, right? That encourage the heart is very, very important.
Right. And he clearly encouraged yours and made an impact in your life, right? Where you're talking about him with a group of your friends and peers here, right? Later. And so I think that alone is a testimony and a testament to what it really looks like to have a sustaining impact for people long term. So I appreciate you sharing that, Rich.
Thank you.
Thank you. Natasha, let's go over to you.
Thank you. So I think I am listening to everyone, and I think it was Nick who really was talking about, the optics of it all. I think as we come to the end of this conclusion, it would behoove me to give this reminder is that ultimately when it comes down to the questions of ethics versus optics, organizations, in addition to all the other questions that we have, in addition to all of the other points that we discussed earlier today, must take a moment to ask themselves, and when we make this decision, what is that decision rooted in, and who are we making it for? Because ultimately, in addition to a lot of the organizations that we mentioned earlier today, another one jumps out to me, and it is the journalism and media world, where a lot of news outlets and organizations have really come to a lot of scrutiny, and attacks in the last 2 years, I would say. And consequently to that, there are a lot of organizations that have made shifts in specific directions in order to ensure that, hey, we remain in business and that, we are able to still do the work that we do without any forms of interference. And the one organization that really has never shifted from their mission or industry objectives and responsibilities has been a lot of the nonprofit organizations. And one I can mainly list would be, if we say NPR has not necessarily moved from the fact that, hey, we are nonpartisan, regardless of how people, think about their coverage. And in the last 2 years, of all the news organizations that have had to have layoffs, as a result of just job cuts that impact, various issues, important issues, or issues that might be more personal or more of a lifestyle than anything else. All of those other for-profit organizations have had layoffs that impacted a lot of employees and also impacted how they do their day-to-day journalistic work. However, with NPR, they have always been consistent in terms of we are a non-biased, nonpartisan news organization, and that nonpartisanship, or whatever their mission statement is, has cost them in the long run in terms of losing funding, be it federal or from other nonprofits, what have you. But they're still standing, because they remain true to what they believe in, regardless of whether people ascribe to it. And I think ultimately, the reason why they're still standing and able to do so is because they are rooted into their thought of who are we doing this for, and going back to their mission statement. And so I think when it comes down to the optics of it all, people know. And we know it's kind of like going on a Yelp review and customers are talking about the bad experience that they have. And Sally, the manager, is there responding to every single comment. I'm sorry, no one came to your table for 30 minutes. That's not what we stand for. Please come back and your next meal is on us. Or email me at Sally at whatever restaurant it is, and we'll work to handle that issue. But hey, Sally, if of the 50 reviews that are on your website, 30 people are stating the same exact complaint, guess what? Your responses are optic. The reviews that are dating over the years of the same exact treatment clearly tells a story. What you're posting in response to what we're saying is optics. What people are saying, how they are experiencing your establishment, is the truth. And unless you are willing to scale back, reset, regroup with your team, retrain, do whatever you have to do, and possibly on the next apology that you write, response that you write of a review, as opposed to saying, that is not what we stand for. Why don't you just say, I am very sorry that was your experience. We have since retrained all of our staff. We are under new management, meaning that the next time you come here, I promise you things will be different. Why will they be different? And why can you trust that? Because I just told you we made changes internally. And allow for us to come in and experience those new changes. But for as long as you are responding and not taking action, it's optics. It's not about your ethics. It's about that public perception. And so organizations, don't be Sally. Be reactive, Regina. Take action.
Don't be Sally, be reactive, Regina. I love that. Just really the actual tangible, practical steps, and then being transparent about what those were. So great conversation from anyone. This hour has just flown by, as it always does. And I'm really excited to kind of round out this ethics conversation next week. So I have purposefully built these topics on one another. So next week, we're going to be talking about ethics under pressure, decision making during organizational crisis. So specifically, when things are going awry, as we have seen them do, how do we retain these values, these ethics, and behave in a way in organizations that really show that even under pressure, we are who we say we are. So hope to see everybody back next week. Very excited to finalize this ethics conversation, and we'll see you back in 1 week's time. 3, 2, and 1.